If you listen to this podcast, chances are it's because you either want to launch a podcast and you want to make sure people actually listen, or because you've already launched a podcast, you're publishing episodes every week, and you log into your analytics dashboard and you look and you're like, holy cow, why is nobody listening? This is exactly where Dennis Guerra was too. He is a high school coach turned podcaster with a very clear mission for his podcast, but not enough listeners were actually tuning in. So in this episode, I am so excited to introduce a brand new segment here on the show, On Air Coaching. And we're going to dig into the real reason that most podcasts get overlooked, because getting clear on your ideal listener is absolutely key. But when you niche down too far, it can also backfire. So this is going to be part one of a 2-part episode series where I will coach Dennis through this and where we're going to unpack both sides of that coin, starting with how to define your audience in a way that actually earns you the click. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Dennis, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Courtney. How are you?
Awesome. Tell me, what made you reach out for some guidance today?
I've just started a podcast a few months back. I've got 4 episodes in, and I'm just hoping to grow the recognition and get people to recognize that it's something they want to listen to.
I love it. Awesome. Well, I want to get into what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing right now so far. We'll talk about that and some of the things that you're hoping to get out of our conversation here today. But first, just humor me because I'm curious. What would you say your goal is for podcasting? What are you hoping a podcast will give you?
Well, it's actually 2 parts. First is I've changed some of my job descriptions over the past few months and have some time on my hands. So I wanted to take my expertise in athletic field and try to bring it to opportunity for other people to listen. And then the other part is I'm hoping to help coaches and parents understand the high school athletics world. I think it's misunderstood. So that's what I'm aiming for.
All right, I'm jotting down some notes. So tell me, okay, you've 4 episodes in, you've got the podcast up and running, you've hit publish. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you're experiencing right now with the show?
Right now, what I'm challenged with is one, I'm getting the guests and scheduling that and getting that organized, but trying to figure out what my listeners want and what they want to hear. And I do some YouTube with it. So what they want to hear and see.
Okay. So you mentioned your listeners, you want to help coaches and parents kind of understand the high school athletics world, which is misunderstood. Can you tell me, like in as clear language and as specific and concise as you can, 1 or 2 sentences, who is your ideal listener?
I think my ideal listener is the coach that is currently coaching or those that want to coach. I think that most of them would be in the field already, coaching somewhere in a high school setting. Some of them may be coaching in the club setting, but looking towards going to high school, wanting to get involved in high school. And I think a lot of them are going to be younger, interested in learning more and discovering more about what it is to be a high school coach.
Okay. So if you could reach one ideal listener and like this ideal type of coach, who would be an ideal coach for you to reach?
I think the ideal coach that I want to reach is the person that's willing to grow and learn and find the experiences that I can share with other coaches and figure out a way to make themselves better. Okay.
So before we even get into packaging, I want to challenge you right here. We're going to make that more specific because right now, So what I'm hearing is, we've got coaches who are currently coaching. They're younger. They might want to be looking to get into high school athletics, or maybe they're already there. Let me ask you this, and this is a question, maybe you've given it some thought to, maybe you haven't, but what would you say for that ideal coach, if you can imagine, if you can even picture a person maybe in your mind right now who would listen to your podcast that would be like, oh, this would be the perfect listener. What would you say some of the biggest challenges that they are experiencing in their role as a coach that you could help them solve with your expertise? What would those challenges be?
I think that a lot of the coaches in the modern day, especially in the past 5-6 years, struggle with communication with their athletes and their parents. And there's been a shift over the past 10 years that they've lost the team mentality. Parents have lost the team mentality and they focus only on their child. And it makes it a very difficult situation for coaches. And we need to figure out how to manage that and handle that.
Awesome. And so that's where you feel like your experience could bridge that gap for them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. See, and that's already getting more specific, because when we get into packaging, we'll kind of be taking a look at some of this as, what is the first impression that your podcast is making for a potential listener? And of course, why this is important, because we want to be able to attract that listener to where they're like, this, I need this. Like, I want to hit play. Like, yeah, this is for me. I'm so glad the show exists. But to get to that point, before we can even look at like what the cover art should maybe look like, or what kind of episode hooks and titles we should be using, we got to understand really what's the psychology of our listener and who is it that we're looking to reach. And so you did a great job there, Dennis, of just kind of sharing this with me. I do want to push you there, and I want to go a little bit deeper here too. But what I will say first is a lot of times what will happen is I'll say, who's your ideal listener? And I'll get something that's maybe a little bit surface level, where it's like, all right, yeah, it's a coach and they're in high school athletics. Okay, great. But let's take that one step deeper. Okay, who are they specifically, if you can picture them in your mind, right? And then you kind of went, okay, they're a little bit younger, and maybe they're not in athletics yet, maybe they are. All right, what's keeping them up at night? Okay, well, now it's communication. Well, that's really different than just saying like, this is a podcast for high school coaches, right? Okay, this is good. So we want to lean into these angles. And what I like to do when we're working with someone is we actually look at what else is already being offered to the marketplace in terms of a podcast. Let's pick any niche. For example, there's a lot of leadership podcasts out there. It's a great niche. There's a lot of room in that niche. And yet it's also very crowded because there's a lot of podcasts being offered to the same people. So from a sports perspective, like, okay, how many podcasts are being offered already to high school coaches? Maybe there's a bunch, maybe there's not that many. I haven't dug in to do that research, but that'd be what I would have you do, is actually look and see, okay, are there other podcasts out there that are already being offered to this ideal person I want to find? If there are, we want to look at what's their unique angle, what's being offered. And I'm saying this, if you're listening right now, you want to do this in your niche because maybe you do have a niche that's a little more saturated in terms of what's already being offered to that ideal listener. In order to stand out from those podcasts, we have to find what makes you different, or what's a unique angle or hook that we could really lean into and make that very clear and very apparent in the messaging of the podcast and the positioning of the podcast to ultimately appeal to that human psyche and that person that on the other end is actually looking on their phone saying, maybe this is something I'm interested in, to earn that click, to get them to click through. So that's why I'm asking you some of these questions. So are there any other challenges that they might be experiencing right now that would be top of mind for them? Communication being one of the biggest. We know that. Is there anything else that they may be struggling with as well?
Perhaps working with their school, their administration within the confines of what they're allowed to do and not do on specific campuses and specific districts. Mm-hmm. Something to that effect, I think would be, and that's for the coach that's already a coach.
Right. If you had to pick, and if you had to just pick one version of that coach, let's say, would it be the person who's already coaching in high schools, or would it be the person who's aspiring to?
I think the one that's already coaching in the high schools. I think that I can help them with that better.
Well, and that's good, because having that clarity can help. For us, our listener, we've got someone who's already got a podcast, and we've got someone who doesn't have a podcast yet. And so that's a little bit different in terms of how we're communicating, right? If you've got two types of ideal listener, essentially. But the question that I always love, and this is, and if you're listening and you're like, well, yeah, me too. I've got some cases where it's the parent and the student, and the podcast is kind of for the student, but it's also for the parent because the parent's the one paying for whatever the student needs, right? And those kind of scenarios where we could say, okay, who is it that I want to reach? And we can build the podcast and the messaging for that person, knowing that it's also going to attract other people, right? And I think this is where a lot of people get into their heads about like niching or dialing in a specific message because they don't want to alienate. But I think in your case, if you know that you want to work with the coach who's already coaching in a high school environment, and the specific expertise that you can bring to the table to help them with some of the very real problems that they have in their life and in their job right now, then I'd want to see you lean into that for the podcast, knowing that those other aspiring coaches will also get value from this if and when they're ready to take that step into high school coaching. How does that feel to you or sound to you? Does that feel scary to be like, let me focus on this one person, or does that feel good?
No, it feels good. It's good insight on making sure that I'm focused and I'm not all over the place, which could be in my 4 episodes. It could have been the 4 episodes I've done all over the place. So it gives me an opportunity as I go into my next recording to think about the questions and refining those.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you this then. From the outside looking in, let's say that high school coach who's already coaching in high school, right? They have these problems that they're experiencing, and maybe there's more problems they're experiencing, but you can help them with these problems. And obviously, if we were to do a deeper dive, we'd flush this out a bit more. But in most cases, there are a few podcasts that have some overlap. There might be other sports podcasts. There might be other podcasts geared toward high school athletics. So let's just imagine that your ideal person, that person that you definitely want listening to your show, is looking at those options. Why do you think it would be important for them to listen to your podcast over the others?
I think it's important when they realize, one, who I have on, because I'm not doing a solo, at least that's not the plan, that I'm going to have guests on, that I'm going to be asking questions, that they're an expert in their field of coaching. I'm consider myself an expert in the field of coaching, and we're focused on coaches, where other podcasts are going to be focused on maybe the players, maybe the environment of high school athletics just in general. But we're going to provide them with expertise, and it's going to be two people having a conversation and they can pick pieces out of.
Okay. So this is about the development of the coach.
Yes.
Now, what I love about where this is heading is, so we're clearer on who specifically you're looking to attract. We're clear on some of the problems that they're experiencing, just surface level. Again, we could go so much deeper on this, but this is already helping to see, like, okay, now when we start to take a look at the different packaging elements of your show, you can see how the dots start to connect. And your podcast specifically, if there was a reason that they would listen to your show over another show that maybe is geared toward high school coaches, that it's actually the development of the coach themselves, right? And we want to make sure we can communicate that to them in a way that they're understanding, like, yeah, you get it, Dennis. Yeah, I understand. Let me ask you this. What other types of podcasts, as far as, let's say, personal development, do you think they might be listening to right now, if you had any idea?
I think that a lot of them are going to be listening to, which you actually mentioned, like leadership type podcasts. They'll probably be listening to sports specific podcasts, getting insight to training, to practice plans, game plans, things of that sort. If that's focused on their job and what they want to do, those would be the two areas I think most coaches would aim.
I bring this up too, because this is really important. When we're looking in a specific niche, we also want to consider what else might that person be interested in or listening to, because that can give us insights into developing, let's say, an SEO strategy for the show. What might they be typing into the search that we could then take a look at and say, we want our podcast to pop up? And so the podcast that you're describing right now would be leadership focused, which is more on the personal development side, and sports focused, which is more on their programming and different things that actually as it relates to their job. Your podcast, to me, based on this conversation we've had here in the last 14 minutes, sounds like it's a blend of both. Ultra specific, really designed to meet them where they're at and bridge that gap for them, that they might be getting a little bit over here and a little bit over there, but now we're going to bring it all under one roof. And here's what you need in order to be the coach that you need to be to succeed in your role and in your career.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's my goal and the aim of my podcast. So.
Okay. I love that. So with that in mind then, and with that, understanding, let's actually I'm going to pull up your podcast here. And if you are listening to this right now, so it's Game On SoCal, and I know that you are in that Southern California area, and I'm just going to go through point by point. And actually, I'm going to back up here for a second too. So if you're just finding this show for the first time, you maybe haven't heard me talk about what I call content gatekeepers. And Dennis, you and I had a chance to meet at PodFest a couple of months back, and we talked briefly about this. But these content gatekeepers, essentially what this is these are the steps of the listener journey that gets them to decide internally, unconsciously, automatically, whether or not they're going to hit play or not on your show. And so what happens is a lot of times people pour a ton of time and energy and effort into the content of their podcast, and even into the marketing of their podcast and the promotion of the show, sharing it on social media, email, all the places, but they're not seeing the growth happen. And a lot of times where it goes back to is the way in which we're communicating the value of the show before the listener hits play. So these are your content gatekeepers. There are 5 of them. And essentially these make up the written messaging of your show, right? The spoken messaging is what you're saying inside of your episodes, the interviews that you're doing, the topics that you're covering. But the written messaging of the show and the visual messaging of your show is what listeners encounter before they hear you say your first word in an episode. So in this point of the stage, right, we've got someone who doesn't know you. They don't know you're an expert in what you do. They didn't even know what you're an expert in. Okay, this is a podcast, high school athletics. Cool. They may click in to learn a little bit more. And we want to make sure we're every step of the way convincing them, again, automatically, because this happens unconsciously, that this is the show for them. So in other words, the industry word we might use or the marketing word we might use here is relevance. We want to be hyper relevant. And that's why this specificity is so important. So the content gatekeepers are your cover art, your podcast name, your podcast description, your episode titles, and then your episode descriptions. Because what a listener is going to do is they're going to search something in a search bar, most likely. Over 54% of the way people find podcasts are through search. They're going to type in a topic. Maybe let's say it's leadership. Let's say it's sports. Let's say it's coaching. Let's say it's high school, right? Whatever the keyword or keywords are that they're typing in. Podcasts and episodes are going to pop up. Now, let's say they find your podcast. Again, they don't know you yet. They've never listened to an episode yet. But the first thing they're going to see is your cover art. So I'm looking at your cover art. It's a black background. We've got red, like the branding is really strong. The colors are really strong. Game on SoCal. The words are big. It's easy to read in the thumbnail size. And you've got a podcast icon under there. Well, there's two things that we want to look at with cover art. Where I would be concerned, Dennis, is with the dark background. Is black part of your brand colors?
Is like that did not go into much thought other than I liked how it looked when I was making it.
Okay, so you're open-minded on this.
I am. Mm-hmm. I am.
All right. The reason why we would want to avoid an all dark black background or an all white background is because depending on whether someone has their device on dark mode or light mode, mm-hmm. we actually lose visual space to the eye. When you're scrolling through, let's say you have a black background on dark mode, it makes your cover art appear smaller and it recedes into the background and it kind of just blends in so it doesn't jump out as much to someone's eye when they're scrolling. The reverse is also true. White background will blend in on light mode. Now, obviously that would be super high contrast if it was white on a dark background, but we never know what someone's going to be looking at, their screen. So second to that, what I like to do, and this is what, when we're working on the graphic piece of this for our clients, is we'll look at and say, okay, in the category that you are positioned in, what do the other podcasts around you look like? What colors are they using? What types of fonts are they using? Some categories have these really saturated colors. It's really funny. It makes me wonder, did someone just go look in marketing and be like, okay, well, so-and-so is doing orange, so I'm going to do orange too. And maybe I'll do like a pinkish orange, and then I'm going to do a yellowish orange. I'm like, how do we get so much of these warm, saturated colors, in one category? And then it's weird, money podcast, you go into finance or investing, guess what color those are going to be, right?
All green.
Green. So some categories, there definitely trends toward a certain color. Some categories are really bright. Some are a little more understated, like leadership. You go in and they all kind of look like little stiff kind of corporate type blues and navies. And, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's interesting how categories can kind of take on a personality almost. So in order to grab attention in the feed, let's imagine your position in the sports category. Let's imagine someone scrolling the sports category. And in order for your podcast to jump out, the colors, they need to contrast what the other people in the category are doing. There needs to be contrast there. And so what happens is in the feed, you're scrolling through, your eye is almost glossing over everything that looks the same. But if something looks different, your eye is going to pause. And so that's kind of what we want to emulate no matter what category you're in, is what colors, especially if you're not married to a specific brand color, in which case we would look and say, okay, how can we make that work in this category? How can we utilize that? What could we pair it with? But the goal is to catch the listener's eye and draw it away from the competition. And it happens in a split second. It happens so quickly. Again, all this is unconscious, kind of automatic stuff that happens as we go through and consume content. But that would be for just the cover art perspective. I would say, let's look at what else is going on in the sports category. And then we would want to look in light of that at what colors would make the most sense for your show. And then we'll get to the title here in just a second. But I'm going to pause right there. You have any questions for me on this?
I think most of the podcasts that I found have been positioning for players, talking about leagues, teams, not necessarily this type of atmosphere specifically for high school sports. So I'd have to jump down there and do some more. But what I'm hearing is drop the black, at least as the main backdrop.
Yep. So something you could do, and this is, you've got red on your cover, and this would be a very simple thing to do, is, even before doing that research, you could just simply go in and put what we call a strike. It's just a border around the outline of your podcast. You can match that red color that you have. You could have that glow kind of going around it. Basically something to just visually separate it from a dark background if someone's looking at it. And that would be like easy, low-hanging fruit kind of a fix. And then we could look deeper into, and I know you mentioned there's not a lot of podcasts specific to the athletics category, high school specific, right? There's not like a category that exists, right? We're just kind of lumped in with a lot of sports podcasts. That's okay. And sometimes we're going to find that where, you might be looking at a niche that has a lot of podcasts on a specific topic. Marketing or investing would be good examples of those. But other categories are going to be kind of a hodgepodge, where like sports, you might have like professional sports, and then there might be like sports that are about soccer versus football versus basketball. And we're over here with high school athletics, right? So it's not so much about having other similar podcasts to you, but rather what else is going on in that category. So that if someone were, scrolling that category, or if your show is popping up in search with other podcasts that may be using similar keywords, that yours would be distinct. So, and then there's more that goes into, the cover art design as far as, branding and how are we really visually conveying the message of your podcast. So, without going too deep into that here, because we'd have to do some deeper dive to really figure out what that specifically would be for your listener. But that's something you could be thinking about too, which is, this is a sports podcast. How are we visually conveying that on the cover? So that they know this is about sports, and specifically high school athletics. If there's a Letterman jacket or something, or if if there's something that would visually kind of convey to a listener in a split second without even having to use words, that this is for high school sports and coaches specifically. If there was something we could use to visually represent that, then that could be something to play with too on the cover. All right, so we're going to pause this conversation right here. In the next episode, we're going to jump right back in and get into one of the biggest reasons why a lot of well-meaning podcasters struggle to grow. Is because without knowing it, they've actually niched down too far. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I want to be in the hot seat like this, I need help with my podcast, then head to the show notes and get on the wait list right now, because this on-air coaching is something I'm bringing more of to the show to help you. So I'm going to need some willing volunteers. Did I say victims? And look, if you've been told to niche down, but your show still isn't getting the traction you want, or you think you've niched down, but you're still not seeing the downloads coming in, well, part 2 of this listener coaching session is going to show you why that advice doesn't always work and what to do instead. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.